Before we begin, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are? And where in the world are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you enjoyed drifting off to quiet stories from forgotten corners of history, don't forget to subscribe. Now close your eyes and let's go back in time to the places no one remembers. And to the people the monuments forgot. Asterisk, you arrive before dawn, when the sand is still cool beneath your feet, and the stars haven't quite faded from the sky. The hum of labor has not yet begun, but already the scent of dust and damp papyrus hangs in the air. You're not a builder, not a laborer. You're a man with a reed pen and a scroll, standing at the edge of one of the most monumental construction projects in human history. And your job is to count it as 2580 BCE. Give or take a few years. Nobody bothers much with calendars here, except to mark when the Nile floods and when it does not. You're stationed at a low wooden table not far from the western edge of what will someday be called the Great Pyramid of Giza. But to you, it's just the northern tomb. Grandeur, paperwork, each day, hundreds of workers, some skilled masons, many simply conscripted farmers heave enormous limestone blocks across sand and mud. And each day, it is your responsibility to mark how many arrive, where from, who signed for them, whether the stone cracked during transport, whether the hauling oxen were too few, whether the water rations lasted the trip. You write, not in ink, but in black and red pigment made from soot and ochre, your numbers and symbols onto flattened papyrus made from Nile reeds. It curls in the heat and stains your hands. But it matters. To the overseers, at least. Maybe to no one else. They call your tally book the ledger, though that word would not exist for another 5 millennia. You know it by another name, the scroll of burden. Not because it is yours to carry, but because everything in it is a burden quantified. Every morning begins the same. A small caravan arrives from the Tura quarries across the river. The limestone blocks are strapped onto sledges, dragged over wet sand, greased with water. They are slick, heavy, silent. No wheels. Wheels would crack under the weight. Instead, silence and sweat do the work. You record. Day 36 of the flood season. 18 blocks. Tura origin. 4 oxen. 2 brakes. The same hand that will one day cradle a date fruit by sunset has already crimped with cramp. Sometimes, tally scroll is passed to a superior overseer named Minka. Minka doesn't speak unless necessary, and even then, only in verbs. Count, sign, seal. His job is to make sure your numbers match his expectations. If they don't, it isn't he who is punished. The pyramid rising behind you does so slowly, with deliberate arrogance. You watch it grow over weeks, then months, then years. Your own bones seem to grind in the same rhythm. And always, you count. You begin to notice that the ledgers contain more than stone, There are notes about food, allocations, lentils, onions, garlic, beer, given not just for pleasure, but because it's safer than water. There's mention of sickness, of injuries, of accidents not reported. Once, a worker collapsed while hauling a block. His name never made it into the scroll. You asked, Minka, why? He didn't answer. Later that day, you found his name carved faintly on the back of a broken sledge. But it was scraped away the next morning. Some weeks, fewer blocks arrive. You record the delays, weather, flood, descent. Once, even whispers of sabotage from another construction site to the south. But such things are not officially acknowledged. You learn which problems are real and which are real but forbidden. Your records are kept in a small chamber next to the baker's shelter, far from the main burial temple. They are dry, dusty, and full of life. Not the kind of life that will be honored in death, but the living memory of daily burdens. You once asked a stonemason why he kept working after his brother died beneath a block that slipped. He said simply, "It will be seen from the stars." That was enough for him. You weren't sure if it was enough for you. One day, a new worker appears. Younger, nervous. He asks what you do. When you explain, he seems surprised. They count every stone. He asks. You nod. He shakes his head and mutters, "Then maybe they'll count me someday." You don't have the heart to tell him that only the stones are remembered, not the ones who bled for them. And so, you write, you count. You seal the scrolls with wax and press the mark of the overseer's scarab ring into them. Then you place them in a reed basket, which will be carried to a scribe chamber somewhere, deep in the administrative wing of the site. No one will ever read them, or perhaps they will thousands of years from now. Perhaps they'll find your scroll, flattened and brittle, in a forgotten chamber. They'll marvel not at the names, but at the numbers. They'll call it evidence, and they'll ask how many men were buried without even a name while you, with your ink-stained fingers, quietly built the first paper trail of empire. But for now, the sun rises, and it is time to count again. What happens when a record survives, but no one remembers what it meant? Asterisk. The morning scroll is half finished when the dust storm rolls in. It starts with a shift in the breeze, nothing dramatic. It's just a small, hot gust from the south that makes the papyrus quiver in the edge of your linen tunic flutter at your ankles. Then, behind it, the color of the air changes. A dull yellow haze creeps across the horizon like a slow, creeping thought. By the time it reaches the camp, it's not weather anymore, it's an interruption. Work halts, stone haulers drop there. Ropes, overseers bark short commands and lead the oxen toward shelter. But you do not move, not right away. Your scroll is still open, the red ink not yet dried on today's entry. It dries streaked, the mark will be unreadable. And, if unreadable, it is as if it never happened. You pinch the scroll flat with your palm and wait until the last semblant annotation about water weight loss in the limestone is dry. Only then do you roll it up and tuck it inside the reed tube under your bench. This is not unusual. Records must be kept even when the world refuses to cooperate. Later that day, as the storm settles and the sunlight returns in slanted golden shafts, Minka calls a quiet meeting. Not the whole crew, just the tallymen, scribes, and one or two from the accounting side of the temple staff. His voice is low and matter-of-fact. There is a block missing. The silence that follows is immediate. In Egypt, nothing is truly lost. Items may disappear into the desert, yes, but never in the accounting. How? asks Beck, the oldest among the scribes. His eyes are grainy, and he rarely speaks unless forced to. Was it dropped? No, Minka says. There was no drop. It was marked as delivered yesterday, but it isn't in position. It's gone. You check your scroll. Yesterday's entry, 23 blocks, Torah origin, all sealed and signed. You even remember the worker who handed you the clay tablet. He had a missing tooth and asked for extra water. Now, someone suggests theft. The idea is almost laughable. What thief would steal a multi-ton block of polished limestone from the middle of the world's most organized chaos? But the idea lingers, not because it's reasonable, but because it's better than the alternative that someone in the system lied. The next few days are spent retallying every block laid along the base. It's tedious, meticulous work, measuring each one, comparing size, angle, cut. You're not trained for this level of inspection, but they use you anyway. Your job is to confirm that the count matches the scroll. It doesn't. You find not one block missing, but two. The second wasn't even listed as arriving, which means either it was never recorded or it was recorded and replaced. Now the whispers begin in the mess area. You overhear workers speculate. Someone is building a private tomb with the Pharaoh's stone. A minor official is bribing guards to divert supplies to his estate. Or, perhaps more troubling, that Minka himself has begun crafting a burial chamber deep in the hill, a secret one, meant to preserve his own name for eternity. You want to believe none of it. But you remember that earlier in the year, a minor nobleman's tomb was discovered outside the Giza enclosure. It used the same limestone, same seal marks, and the noble's name had been chiseled off. You remember the cracked block that a worker once carved his name into? Quietly, with no permission. You'd seen it during inspection. You'd even written it down. That block was rejected, not because it was flawed, but because someone dared to make it personal. Maybe that's the crime. Not stealing stone, but stealing remembrance. Meanwhile, the scrolls continue to multiply. You now keep 3. 1 for delivery, 1 for laying, and 1 for waste. You're told it's to prevent future discrepancies. But all it means is more pigment, more curled fingers, more nights trying to remember which symbol means weather delay and which one means stone denied. One evening, a boy no older than 13 joins the crew. He's not strong, not trained, but he is fast with numbers. Ka assigns him to you. K, you're to train him in the art of recording. His name is Nizam. He asks questions constantly. Are the broken blocks still counted? Why don't we name the carriers? Why don't the workers get scrolls too? You have no answers, so you show him the reed pen. You let him copy water allowances for the week. He uses too much ink. Still, his marks are clear. He says, "My father was buried last month. He helped lay the king's chamber ceiling." But his name's not on anything, not even a stone. You ask. "No," he says. He carved a mark into the side of one block, a tiny scarab near the back. They told him it would be sanded off. And was it? I don't know. But the block cracked. Okay, you used it anyway. You nod. That's how most stories end here. Not with a tomb, but with a compromise. Weeks pass. The second block is never found. A replacement is sourced from further. Down the quarry, slightly smaller, slightly less polished, is fitted into the side, facing the north wind far from the entrance. No one will see it unless they're looking for flaws. You make a note in the scroll. Block 214. Alternate used. Quarry mark absent. Weight 10% below standard. You know, no one will ever read it. Okay? But you write it anyway. That night, Nizam asks, "You, what happens to the scrolls when the pyramid is finished?" "They're stored." You say, "Where?" "In the record hall." "Then what?" "They decay." Nizam frowns. "So all this writing, it disappears." You pause. "Yes, but that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" You hesitate. And then you say, "To make sure it existed, even if just for a little while." But you wonder, quietly, if that's enough, because the pyramid will stand. The Pharaoh's name will be remembered. The tomb inscriptions will last for thousands of years. But the scrolls, the ones that say how many men died, how many blocks cracked, how many names were erased, those will turn to dust, and no one will count the cost. What happens when the paper record of a civilization outlasts the lives that built it, but not the silence that follows? Asterisk, the final block is lowered into place with a silence you hadn't expected. No cheers, no songs, just the sound of ropes loosening, oxen huffing in the distance, and men stepping back. Their shoulders slackened, not from pride, but from exhaustion. You're standing beneath the shadow of something that is now whole. The Great Pyramid, though no one calls it that yet. To the workers, it's simply Khufu's horizon, a shape against the sky. It feels heavier now that it's finished, even though your daily ledgers have gotten lighter. The final scroll was sealed yesterday. Your hands, once blackened daily with soot and pigment, are cleaner now. They don't ache as much. You write less. You count less. The work has shifted. Some tallymen are sent back to their home districts. Some are offered work at new sites, Saqqara, Dashur, even the western quarries near Abydos. You're asked to remain, to help archive, a strange word in this place. Archive what? Stones? Sweat? Still, you stay. The reed scrolls you wrote over the past decades, hundreds of them are now packed into clay jars, not stored in the king's chamber. Of course, that's for his soul. The administrative scrolls are buried in the lower chambers, beside the grain ledgers and water storage reports. They call it the Chamber of Logistics, a room no tourist will ever photograph. No priest will ever enter. Menka is gone, promoted upward, perhaps, or reassigned. No one says Nisim remains for a while longer, but he's restless. One afternoon, he hands you a scroll, not an official one, just a loose sheet of pale papyrus sand, says quietly, "This is my father's story." You read it. It's clumsy, ink smudged, some glyphs malformed. But it's beautiful. Story of a man who worked the quarry line for 17 years, lost 2 brothers to crushed ankles, and once carved a heart-shaped mark into a block that now rests in the king's burial wall. "I'll keep it," you say. But Nizam shakes his head. "No, hide it." "Where?" He points to a sealed clay jar marked with a red triangle, the symbol used for surplus records. You take his scroll and place it inside. It's beneath your own scroll from the day the block was stolen. Then you reseal the lid. No one will read these for millennia, if ever. You tell yourself that's all right, that the act of writing them was enough, but you don't quite believe it. A few days later, you take a walk around the base of the pyramid, not as a scribe this time, just as someone who wants to see what he helped shape. You count the courses as you move. 1, 2, 30, 60. The stone is smoother here than it was during construction. Defined casing stones have been polished. Some still gleam like ivory in the sun, but there are places where blocks are misaligned, corners where sims don't match. One section along the northwest face where 3 blocks look newer than the others. You suspect those were replacement stones added when originals cracked or vanished. You pause there. You don't touch them. But you wrote about these blocks. You noted their defects. You sealed their scrolls. And yet, now that the structure is whole, the imperfections don't matter. The pyramid doesn't care how it was made, only that it was finished. You sit down in the sand beside the wall and stare up until your neck aches. The top vanishes into a shimmer. Somewhere in the chamber above, the pharaoh lies preserved, perfumed, hidden inside a box within. A box within a box. You'll never see it. That's not for you. Your part was the ink. Later that evening, while packing scrolls, you find one that doesn't belong. It's not in your handwriting. The symbols are old-fashioned, jagged. You realize quickly that it must be from an earlier dynasty. The title reads, Tally of Sunstones, Project Bent Pyramid, Snefru's Pyramid. The one that cracked halfway through and had to be rebuilt at a different angle. A failure, but still standing. You unfold the scroll and read, Day 54, 2. Stones rejected. One worker caught inscribing a falcon symbol in the seam of block 491. He was removed from sight. Block was laid anyway. You close the scroll and hold it in your lap. It's the same story, different site, different king, different names, but the same silence. You begin to suspect that every pyramid, not just Khufu's, but all of them, stands atop a mountain of vanished names. That, for every pharaoh's tomb, there are 10,000 men and women whose lives were folded into stone and buried without prayer. No one sings songs for the scribes, for the men who poured water ahead of sledges, for the woman who cooked lentils in a cracked pot for 400 laborers. But they were there, and you were one of them. In that moment, you decide to write one last scroll. Not for the archive, not for the overseers, just for whoever might find it one day if the sand gives way. You write, I was here. I counted the blocks. I saw the names erased. I remember. You don't sign it. Instead, you press a small, broken reed into the edge of the scroll. Nessim's first writing tool, so one he ruined with too much pigment. Then you roll it tightly. Tuck it behind the basket of broken wax seals. It might be destroyed. More likely, no one will ever find it. Or, if they do, they won't understand it. The language will be lost. The script unreadable. But you still write it. Because history, now understand, isn't only what gets carved into tomb walls. It's also what is scribbled in corners, what is sealed in jars, what is buried in storage rooms beneath the places we worship. The Great Pyramid will last. That's certain. But maybe, if the wind is right and the jar doesn't break, someone will whine. They ask, who were the ones who built this hand? Why did they leave no names behind? Asterisk, if you walk far enough from the stone base of the Great Pyramid, past the dust trails left by oxen and the discarded ropes and broken sledges, past the wooden scaffolds and the faint shouting of foremen measuring the alignment of limestone blocks, you'll reach something quieter, not silent, but softer. It is a village not grand, not sacred, not preserved in any royal record, but vital. It has no formal name. You might hear it called Perset Jet, meaning the place of the strangers, or Pank, the place of living, depending on who you ask, K. But to those who rise and sleep here, it is simply the village. This is where the pyramid builders lived, not slaves. That word belongs to later empires. These were freemen, most of them, working in rotation, conscripted from farms, or hired for a few months at a time during the flood season when their fields were submerged beneath the Nile's high waters. Others were artisans, specialist stonecutters, bakers, potters, carpenters who stayed year-round and knew the cracks and currents of the pyramid site like they knew their own children's faces. The village lies in the shadow of Giza, quite literally. In the late afternoon, the silhouette of the rising pyramid drapes over the rooftops, casting long, jagged shadows across the mud brick walls. But here, in this modest cluster of rooms and courtyards, is where life actually happened. The homes are narrow but warm, built of sun-dried bricks stacked in layers, sealed with straw and clay, and brushed smooth on the outside. Each house has a small courtyard, often shared between families. Inside, you'll find woven mats, low wooden stools, and pots of lentils, or chickpeas resting by the hearth. Children play between work shifts, their feet dusty, their shouts echoing off the plastered walls. Mothers tend to them with the same hands that bake barley bread in dome-shaped ovens or patch-worn linens with needle and palm thread. Old men sit beneath half-shaded awnings, sharpening blades or telling stories about past kings whose tombs now rest under a dozen feet of sand. In the mornings, the sound of flint striking against pottery echoes as fires are lit. Smoke rises lazily into the pale sky. Some men head to the construction site. Others walk toward the quarry. Few remain behind, building tools, grinding pigment, or hauling jars of beer brewed from emmer wheat in the communal hut at the village edge. It is in this brewing hut that records are also kept. Not like the formal scrolls of the royal tallymen, but practical notes scratched onto shards of broken pottery, astraca, they're called. Bits of clay reused to track food portions, work assignments, or disputes between neighbors. One such shard reads, Kansu did not return the chisel, for days gone. Another, bakery, 3 pots short. Blame not Maret, oven failed, a tease. Fragments, unremarkable to kings and priests, are now some of the most intimate records we have of the people who truly built Egypt's marvels, and not all of them are men. Among the workers are women too. Not many at the construction front, but here in the village, they are critical. Some are bread makers, their arms muscled from kneading dough. Others are water haulers or beer brewers' tasks, as exhausting as dragon stone, if not more so, especially in the heat. A few, the boldest among them, carve small figurines from leftover chert. These are sold quietly to passing merchants or gifted to the dead as simple offerings. They are not honored in temples. They do not receive tombs, but they are remembered in their own way, in the way a pot bears the print of the maker's thumb, or a floor tile wears smoother where a mother always knelt to wash her child. At the edge of the village lies a modest cemetery, not an acropolis of grandeur, but a field of low mounds marked by stone slabs or nothing at all. When a worker dies, whether by accident, exhaustion, or illness, he is buried here, wrapped in linen if there's enough, or in matting if not. No gold, no grave goods, no hieroglyphic spells, and yet not forgotten, because each mound has stories. A man named Ipu, whose grave was nothing more than a ring of pebbles, once fixed sledges for the quarry crew. He had a limp, never spoke, but he built the best axle rods in the entire camp. When he died, the carpenter placed one of his chisels beside him. A woman named Tia, who lost 2 children to heat stroke, still found time to grind spices for her neighbors. Her grave contains a worn alabaster bowl. A child named Hennet, barely 6 years old, is buried with a palm seed necklace made by her brother from discarded bead trimmings. None of this was meant to last. The winds were supposed to erase them. Well, sometimes they don't. The streets of the village are uneven, shaped more by use than design. They curve and dip where families expanded their homes, or where rain runoff carved shallow ruts. In some corners, you can still see the faded red paint of an old doorway. It's the last mark of a family who left generations ago. The workers kept to a schedule, 10 days on, 1 day off. It was called a decade, not in years, but in labor cycles. On that one rest day, the village would stir differently. Musicians would play flutes. Old men would chat epic tales of gods walking the earth. The children would be given fig paste, or dates if any had been traded in recently. One such day, a potter named Jehudi carved a small figure of a man kneeling. On the bottom, he wrote a single symbol, an open eye. He placed it in his home shrine, no bigger than a brick shelf. It was not an image of Pharaoh. It was not even a god. It was simply the idea of being seen, to be seen not by kings or scribes or gods, but by each other. That was the heart of the village. Even as they built tombs meant to last for eternity, their own homes vanished year by year. Wind peeled the plaster. The Nile shifted. The bricks crumbled. Eventually, no one remembered where the bakery had stood, or who had buried the broken chisel beside IPU, until a modern team of archaeologists uncovered the site. It was the 1990s. They were expecting rubble. Instead, they found neatly aligned walls, grinding stones, beads, tools, bones, trash dot, and with them, names, scratched into pots, written on astraca, sometimes faded, sometimes bold. One name appeared more than others. Pemiunebu. Not a noble, not a priest, just a baker. Her name had been written on a mixing jar, not in reverence, just as a label. And yet, 5,000 years later, her name was read again. Pemiunbu, a woman who once stirred flour with honey, who made the morning meal for men who would carry the Pharaoh's bones to eternity. Her grave is not known, but her jar survives, and in that small miracle, the village whispers something back to the stone. What happens when a life meant to disappear leaves behind a name carved in clay instead of granite? Asterisk, by mid-morning, the village is buzzing. The stone haulers are already at the base of the pyramid. The overseers have shouted their daily roll calls. The quartermaster has handed out fresh jugs of beer, thin, sour, nourishing, and now the village returns to its quieter pulse, a slower rhythm, one that has less to do with kings and more to do with mending sandals, drying dates, scraping lentils from the bottom of the pot. A scribe from the temple passes through the day, his eyes half-lidded under a linen headscarf. He doesn't belong here. His sandals are clean. His hands don't carry dust. The villagers pause to watch him, not because he is important, but because he is temporary. Outsiders rarely stay. He walks straight to the house of Merit, the healer. She's not old, not quite, but her face is lined from sun and care. Her home smells of crushed garlic, burnt myrrh, and wet reeds. Inside, bundles of herbs hang from rafters made of salvaged wood. Beneath a low shelf, a ceramic jar holds beetle, shells, dried locusts, and the bark of sycamore trees. The scribe doesn't speak first. Meret does. You're here about the fever? The scribe nods. It started 2 weeks ago. A boy hauling water collapsed. At first, they blamed the heat. Then, another boy fell ill. Then 2 men, then a child. The symptoms were the same: sweating, shivering, a rash of small red blisters near the throat. Copert, too, did not know. No royal physician visited. This wasn't a palace district. It's workers. Replaceable, so they came to Merit. She doesn't read hieroglyphs. She doesn't wear amulets or recite spells. But she knows how to brew a fever-reducing tea from willow bark. She knows which fungus causes vomiting and which cures it. She can touch a child's forehead and know when death is coming, when to boil more barley water and wait. The scribe asks for names. She gives them. Quietly, respectfully. He scribbles onto a scroll and doesn't look up. What will be done? She asks. He shrugs. Report it. Record it. Monitor. And then he leaves. Merit watches the dust rise behind his sandals. He doesn't ask who buried the dead. He doesn't ask where, because no one writes those names down. At the edge of the village is a pile of discarded tools, broken sledges, cracked buckets, shattered pottery, spilled something. A small model pyramid, barely, knee-high, made from pebbles and sun-dried mud. Around it, she's placed small objects of scraps of cloth, a fishbone, a reed flute without holes. It isn't a game. It's memory. The child's name is Setapanor. She's 5. Her brother died last week from the fever. She tells anyone who listens that this is his tomb. Her mother lets her build it. No one stops her, not even when she tries to place a fresh lotus flower on the top and it wilts in the sun before she finishes. That afternoon, in the central courtyard, the women gathered to prepare a funerary meal, not because a priest ordered it, but because the fever returned. This time it's Mary, the potter's apprentice. He was strong, smiled easily, never stole from the bread basket, but he died anyway. They make lentil cakes, smear them with honey, and bake them flat against the stones. They offer figs and garlic, cloves small, precious luxuries. One woman carves a scarab from a fragment of broken obsidian and places it on the cloth that covers his face. The burial happens before sunset. No priest, no hymn, just silence and a few whispered names. The body is lowered into the soil, wrapped in matting, sprinkled with a bit of beer. It isn't much, but it's enough. Before the last dirt is shoveled, someone presses a shard of pottery into the grave. On it, a name: Mary, son of Tamaray. Friend, that shard might not survive the year. The wind could scatter it. The sun could bleach it. The jackals could dig it out. But someone tried. Back in the village, evening falls. Smoke curls from chimneys. Children chase shadows with sticks. The workers return slowly, feet dragging, backs bent. Someone plays a flute, out of tune, but cheerful. The baker's youngest daughter carries a jar of date paste to share with Merit. For your medicine, she says, and Merit smiles. She has no medicine tonight, just tired hands and the weight of a day that remembered too much. At the bread ovens, a man named Horemheb repairs a cracked stone. He doesn't speak much, but everyone knows he once laid the foundation stones for the king's burial chamber. He could have stayed there. Instead, he came back to the village. When asked why, he simply said, "Stones are loud. Here, I can sleep." That's the truth of this place. It is not where history was carved, but where it was carried. Not where names were etched in gold, but where they were spoken aloud, quietly, over pots of barley stew. Near the southern edge of the village is a long stone bench. No one knows who placed it there. Hey, it's smooth from years of sitting. In the evenings, elders gather there and watch the sun touch the pyramid's point. They call it the finger of Ra. Some say it's good luck. Others say nothing at all. One of those elders, Packet, was once a scribe, not like the temple man, not for kings. The wind is strong this morning, and it carries more than dust. It lifts fragmentine curls of straw, papyrus scraps, ash from last night's fires, swirls them in slow, deliberate spirals across the cracked earth. In the workers' village, nothing is ever truly still. Even the shadows move gently, bending with the sway of linen curtains and low awnings patched with palm fiber. And yet, somehow, this feels like a quieter day than most. Word has spread. The king's burial chamber has been sealed. That means the pyramid is finished. At least, officially. There are still stones too smooth, passageways to plaster, supply tents to dismantle, tools to be hauled back to the granaries. But for most, the work is over. The overseers will leave soon. The quarry orders have been cancelled. Some laborers have already begun the long walk back to their home provinces along the Nile. They carry papyrus receipts authorizing their travel in a small pouch of leftover wages, sometimes grain, sometimes linen, rarely silver, and the village. It will fade, not all at once. That's not how things end here. First, the children stop playing near the bakery. Then the ovens go cold. Then the beer hut brews a smaller batch. One day, you look around, and you notice the noise is thinner. The firewood pile isn't refilled. The path to the well is less worn. It happens quietly. Some families choose to stay. They have nowhere else to go. Others move to new sites. New kings demand new tombs. And the work never truly ends. But this place, this tangle of courtyards and sleeping mats, the benches worn smooth by years of tired backs, the doorways traced with red ochre to keep bad spirits out, will soon become another layer of sand. You begin to notice how many things were never meant to last. The floor tiles are chipped, the clay jars leak, the walls sweat salt. Even the reed baskets woven tightly once now unravel at the corners. The bread is flat, the beer too sour, the day is too long. But beneath that erosion, something else stirs. A scribe arrives from the royal temple, not the same man as before. This one is older. He carries no scroll. It's just a simple board slung across his shoulder and a pot of ink sealed with linen. He walks the village without speaking, peering into homes, noting what remains. Not valuables, those are long gone, but names. He asks the few who remain to write their names on pottery shards, not titles, not prayers, just names. When someone asks why, he says, to make sure they're not all lost. He doesn't stay long, a few days at most. But before he leaves, he buries a small jar near the bakery wall. No ceremony, no announcement. Just a hole, a jar, and a mark on the ground. It's sealed with wax and rope, not gold or amulets. It's cracked names, scratched in haste. Kit uneven hands. Meret, Tamaray, Packet, Nizam, Setapanur. Meret, yours perhaps. 2. That night, someone lights a fire and tells a story. It's not one of God's or kings. It's about a man who tripped carrying a stone, and the joke he made as he fell. Storyteller can't remember the man's name, but the laughter returns anyway. That's how the village keeps breathing, through the stories that aren't recorded, but are repeated. Later, a child draws a scene on the wall of her home using red ochre. It shows a triangle crooked, uneven, and a stick figure beside it holding a round jar. No inscription, no interpretation, just the faint line of someone remembering something badly, but sincerely. Time moves, years pass, then centuries, then millennia. The village vanishes, the winds reclaim the homes. The Nile shifts again. Eventually, only the stone base of the pyramid remains visible, and even that is buried halfway in sand. Travelers walk past the site and think it's just a hill. Locals tell stories of giants or gods. Then, in a modern century, the archaeologists return. They come not for treasure, but for traces. They find the worker cemetery, first simple graves, shallow and unadorned. Then the homes, the ovens, the beer jars, the ostraca, and finally, that little jar behind the bakery. When they open it, they find names. Not enough to fill a book, just enough to fill a pause. They read them aloud, unsure if they're pronouncing them correctly. But that doesn't matter. For a moment, those lives forgotten even in their own time are spoken again in the village. For a breath becomes real once more. It does not matter that the people buried here never stood inside the king's burial chamber. It does not matter that they were never painted on the tomb walls or prayed to in temples. What matters is that they were here. They walked, they worked, they bled. They sang, they lived, and someone against the odds, against the tide of history tried to remember them. Perhaps that is all any of us can hope for. A name on a jar, a scarab carved in stone, a fragment of pottery that survives just long enough to be read aloud again when the monuments rise no more. And the last pyramid stone crumbles, will the world still pause for the people who lived just beyond the shadow? In the warmth of forgotten kitchens and the stillness of dusty courtyards. You know the names of kings. They are carved deep in stone, tucked in golden cartouches, sung by priests for thousands of years. You know Khufu Cheops, as the Greeks later called him, because his pyramid is taller than memory and heavier than any truth it was meant to protect. You know Djoser, Snefru, and Karol, etched in record. But the men who imagined those tombs, the ones who drew their outlines on flax paper scrolls, measured their bases with strings soaked in palm oil, traced the angle of the sun to determine how high a soul should climb, they are nearly silent in the record. They were architects, and most of them could not even sign their own names. You imagine one of them now. He is not young. His back is hunched slightly, not from old age, but from years spent stooped over wooden planks and stone ledges. His hands are rough, calloused from handling string, chalk, bone-set compasses. His name, if it survives, it all might be something, like Nefermot, Kagemni, or Hamunu. But in truth, we don't really know. He wakes just before dawn in a stone chamber filled with drawings. Not artistic flourishes, but precise lines, triangles, angles, ratios, charts of seasonal floods, sketches of ramp designs, records of copper chiselware. He does not pray to Ra before work, not because he is impious, but because the sun is already inside his work. The angles of light, the curves of the horizon, the exact alignment of the stars, these are his morning offerings. His job is to make the pharaoh live forever. Through geometry, he picks up a reed brush, dips it into pigment, and begins tracing lines on a stretched piece of papyrus. Today, he must review a modification to the internal corridor. There was a report that the original ceiling chamber is unstable. If he lowers it, he risks reducing the spiritual resonance of the chamber. If he does not, it might collapse under the weight of 60,000 tons of stone. He works in silence. He is surrounded by assistants boys, barely older than 10, tasked with mixing pigment, cleaning brushes, holding measuring rods. One of them writes his name on a wall scrap when no one's looking. Later, it's scrubbed off. The architect doesn't notice. He's calculating stress tolerances using units of ket, cubit, finger, and palm. He's planning for weight that will never move again once placed. His most prized possession is a wooden triangle, polished smooth from years of handling. It is cracked, once repaired, with linen soaked in resin and wrapped tight. Still accurate, in the corner of the chamber sits a box of stones. Not a random rubber leech, one labeled, measured, smooth. These are the trial blocks. He tests angles here before instructing the quarry. Even kings don't command stone blindly. The architect is respected, but never praised. He eats alone. He is invited to speak with priests only when his numbers don't align with the sacred geometry. Nay, correct him, not because he is wrong, but because he is secular. He is invited to dine with foremen only when there are structural failures. Then he is blamed, even when it was someone else's math. Still, he stays, because in his own mind, he believes this pyramid is a ladder, not just for the king's soul, but for knowledge. A monument to measurement, a shrine to precision. His challenge is impossible: to design eternity in a world made of erosion. And so, he invents methods that will be lost. He develops the chord leveler, taut strings stretched across two fixed rods to ensure flatness. He uses shadow measurements at noon to find true north. He charts star risings over decades to align the base of the pyramid with the heavens, all without paper, all without modern math. And yet, he succeeds. The base of Khufu's pyramid is so level that modern lasers can barely detect deviation, less than 2 centimeters across hundreds of meters. And he did it with nothing but wood, stone, twine, and sky. Still, no inscription of him remains in gold. You find fragments. A tomb inscription near Giza, broken, reads, Royal Seal Bearer, Overseer of Construction, ... Double quotes. The name is erased, perhaps vandalized, perhaps never written. Another says, he who measured the heavens and spoke to stone. Pout. Once, an archaeologist found a sketch on a discarded piece of limestone. It showed a crude outline of the pyramid's base, with a tiny figure standing beside its arms raised, a triangle above his head. Was it a joke? A signature? A prayer? We don't know. The architect's world was not made for remembrance. Too was made for alignment, for solving puzzles made of mass and time, for balancing spirit with structure. He walks the construction site in the afternoons, watching men drag stone along the mudded tracks. He says little. Occasionally, he marks a stone for adjustment. Occasionally, he sighs. He knows that once the capstone is placed, once the pharaoh is buried, and the priests begin their hymns, his part will end. The king will be eternal, but he will go home. There is no monument to the man who measured the slope, no shrine for the mind that realized the pyramid had to be hollow inside, no cartouche for the one who knew that perfection in stone was always a trick of the light. Still, you wonder, what happens to the one who designs a structure to last forever, but cannot write his name inside it? Asterisk, the architect stands near the base of the pyramid, looking up. The sun has climbed to its highest point, casting minimal shadows. The structure looms, nearly finished. Its geometry, though brutal in size, feels almost delicate in proportion. From where he stands, the angle looks like a blade laid against the sky. He closes one eye and measures it with the reed in his hand. Still correct. He does this not for ceremony, but for peace. There are no celebrations for the nearly complete. No priests come to bless the angle. The stones don't sing, but he knows with a kind of quiet certainty that something sacred is still occurring here because the math holds today. The team is lifting blocks onto what will become the king's internal gallery along slanted passage that rises deep inside the pyramid's heart. to Grand Gallery, as future scholars will call it. It's narrow, high, lined with smooth limestone, and built not just to guide, but to awe. The architect designed it to mimic the journey of a soul, long, confined, rising, not a staircase, but an ascent. No one asked for this. There were no blueprints, just his understanding of weight and light. The workers do not know why the gallery's ceiling rises in stepped tiers. They are told only to place each corbel layer 1 cubit back, 1 cubit up. When asked why, the overseer shrugs and says, "So it will not collapse." That's true, in part. Stepped ceiling redistributes pressure from above. But also, architect wanted the king's soul to pass upward without bearing the weight of the earth. When the stone moves, he watches every moment. He sees the oxen strain, the ropes stretch, the sledges groan. He counts heartbeats between heaves. He looks for signs cracks in the stone, failure in the joints, and he says nothing. He only marks. If he speaks too much, the foremen think him arrogant. If he says too little, they think him unsure. So he balances the way he balances everything, through measured silence. Later, in his chamber, he takes a block of limestone and scratches into it a shape-a long hallway, sloped upward, with notations for block weight and angle. He draws the air shaft to the stars. K marks where the soul will rise. He knows no one else will understand the diagram. He carves it anyway. He places the stone beneath his cot. It's not for others. It is for continuity. That evening, a young boy comes to deliver a reed scroll. Not a message, but a question from the temple. Why are so many internal passages being sealed? The architect does not respond in words. He points to a triangle scratched on the wall. Not all things are for entering, he says. Some are for guiding. The boy doesn't understand, but he nods anyway. The architect recalls his first year on site. Back then, the foundations weren't even dug. He had argued for a deeper base, worried the soil near the Nile was too soft. He lost that debate. Now, the pyramid still stands. But in the back of his mind, the worry lingers. Every night, he listens for cracks. Sometimes, in the heat of day, he feels dizzy with the pressure of it all. Not just the weight of stone, but the weight of knowing that the Pharaoh's eternity rests on his decisions. There is no relief, no feast, no name to fall back on. His family will not be buried in a king's valley. He will not be sung about. He will be buried with his measuring rod, perhaps, and with the fragment of string he used to align the northeast corner. Maybe, if he's lucky, a stonecutter will remember him. Maybe a quarryman will tell his child, there was a man once who drew perfect angles in sand. But even if not, the slope of the pyramid will remain, and that, he hopes, is enough. One morning, a small ceremony is held at the base. Priests arrive to bless the placement of a new cornerstone. It's more theater than ritual, but it matters. Architect stands to the side, outside the circle of importance. Still, the high priest glances his way and murmurs something in acknowledgement. Not loud, not public, but real. That evening, the architect walks the perimeter alone. He traces the outer stones with his fingers. His joints ache. His sandals are worn smooth. He's never left Egypt, but he's measured distances wider than his lifetime. He stops at the northwest corner. It's the one that gave him trouble for years. Slight settling in the stone, half a cubit too low. He tried to compensate. He designed a taper that would shift the imbalance across 5 courses. It worked, though no one noticed. He crouches and scratches a small mark into the base. Not a name, just a circle with a line through it, his sign. Then he stands and walks back, slowly, feeling the sand shift underfoot. In his quarters, he adds another line to his diagram stone. A final notation. No one will ever see it. He doesn't care, because a pyramid is not just a tomb. It's a silence shaped by hands that knew how to measure absence, and his hands did that work. What is the legacy of the man whose work is eternal, but whose name was never meant to survive the wind? Asterisk, the day the capstone is laid. The architect does not attend the ceremony. He watches from a distance, seated on a rock worn flat by years of afternoon meals. The priests are there, chanting under a linen canopy. A small group of nobles stands near the base, their robes bright with fresh dye. The workers cheer when the capstone is hoisted, its polished sides flashing briefly in the light before it's nudged into place. But the architect remains still. The top is too far away to see clearly. The shouts are muffled by the wind. And truth is, for him, the moment has already passed. His part ended weeks ago when the last chamber was sealed in the internal corridors, cloaked by layers of fill stone. No one will enter them again, not for thousands of years, not until the memory of his name is gone, if it was ever known at all. Instead, he holds a piece of string in his lap, frayed at both ends, dyed red with faded pigment. Piece, the original alignment cord he used to mark the southeast corner of the pyramid's foundation. The other half, he buried years ago beneath the first layer of limestone. It is tradition of sorts, not official, but among the architects, the few who have ever built something this enduring. It is understood, you must leave a part of yourself beneath. It's the weight not to be found, just to know it's there. The architect has grown thinner. His ribs show when he changes clothes. His voice, once steady, now breaks when he speaks for too long. He hasn't designed anything new in months. Not because he's finished. No architect is ever finished, but because he's begun to realize that this might be the only design that ever mattered. He once drew plans for a second project, further south. A smaller tomb, perhaps. A temple aligned to Sirius. The sketches still sit under a pile of cracked boards in his chamber. But no one has asked for them. The king is entombed. The treasury is thinning. The new pharaoh may choose another architect or a new style altogether. That night walks the perimeter one last time. The moon is high, casting sharp-edged shadows across the face of the stone. From this angle, the pyramid is less like a monument and more like a mountain, a thing that belongs to the earth, not to men. He stops near the west wall. There, half buried beneath loose sand, is a flat stone slab. It's unmarked, but he knows what lies beneath it. A box. He placed it there himself. Inside are the tools that built this place. A reed brush, a triangle of copper, the fragment of the alignment cord. In the small block of limestone, he scratched his gallery diagram into the one no one ever saw dot. No priest will consecrate it. No list will mention it, but it's real. He lingers there a while, not to say goodbye. There's no ceremony for leaving the thing you gave your life to. Just quiet, just breath. In the morning, he packs his scrolls into a bundle wrapped with linen. He tells the overseer he's returning to the Delta to see his brother. Whether the brother still lives, he doesn't know. He hasn't spoken to him in years, okay? But it's easier to explain departure when there's a destination. Before he goes, he stops by the workers' village. It's nearly empty now. Just a few families remained, preparing to follow the next construction wave southward. He sees Marit, the healer, mixing herbs in a cracked bowl. "You're leaving?" she says. He nods. She doesn't ask why. She doesn't wish him luck. She just says, "We found your string, the one by the southern wall." He says nothing. She smiles faintly. "We kept it." Then she goes back to her work. At the edge of the village, the children have drawn in the dirt, triangles mostly, so with eyes inside them. One has tiny dots across the base, each labeled with the first letters of names Mary, Packet, Hennet. None of them are kings. The architect walks past without stopping. He doesn't want to disturb it. Let the children imagine the pyramid was made for them. He reaches the water's edge by midday. small boat waits piles, pirates bound. Simple. No canopy. The oarsman nods, helps him board, and says nothing as they push off. Hey. He looks back one last time. The pyramid pierces the sky, as it always has. The light glances off its northern face. From here, it's a perfect shape, but it is also quiet. Before the stones were ever stacked, before a single chisel struck the limestone at Giza, the real work began far away along the banks of the Nile, where the earth is soft, the reeds are high, and the air smells faintly of wet clay and fish. Oil. There, hidden in the slow curves of the river, were roads, but they weren't roads in the way we understand them now. There were no cobbles, no carved signs, no wide lanes bearing the weight of wheeled carts. These were temporary roads, roads made of soaked mud, crushed reeds, wooden planks, sweat. They existed for one purpose, to move the immovable. You are standing at the edge of one such path in the year 2580 BCE. The pyramid has not yet risen, but the plans exist. Hundreds of thousands of blocks must be brought from the quarries across the river, some weighing several tons each. The Nile, swollen with its annual flood, stretches wide across the valley. The stone must travel not just across this water, but overland, through soft banks and shifting soil. And so the builders began with the river. Flat-bottomed boats, made of papyrus and sometimes cedar, are lashed together and reinforced with thick planks. Their design is simple, low, wide, and steady. Okay, they aren't elegant, but they don't need to be. They need to float in, stay that way. A crew of 8 to 12 men rows each barge, moving with the current when they can, fighting against it when they must. They chant in time, their voices low, not joyful, but rhythmic. Each boat carries a single stone, one dot, because that is all the river will bear. The stone is secured with ropes and wedges. If the boat shifts too much, or if the load is unbalanced, the entire thing capsizes. When that happens, there are no second chances. The stone is lost. The barge must be rebuilt. The men know this. They row carefully. Navigating the river is only half the journey. The real difficulty begins when the barges reach the riverbank near the construction site. There is no dock, no crane, just soft, wet ground and the knowledge that this weight must be carried inland. So they build roads not with stone, but with water. Each morning, workers pour water along the sand to make it compact. Not flooded, but soaked, just enough to reduce friction. It's a technique passed down by trial and error. Dry sand grips the sledges. Wet sand lets them glide. Behind them, others lay down mats made of palm fibers, wet reeds, even old linen. These are placed beneath wooden sledges, flat runners, built from tamarisk or acacia. The stone is loaded onto the sledge with ramps, pulleys, and brute force. Then the pulling begins. It takes dozens of men, sometimes oxen. Sometimes ropes are looped around wooden pegs hammered into the ground, and workers twist them too slowly, winch the stone forward. They pause every few meters to pour more water, straighten the path, or replace broken planks. Progress is slow. Inches per breath, feet per hour. The work is unrelenting, and still, the roads hold each track. Each patch of soaked mud is recorded not in scrolls, but in memory. The overseers know which curves are prone to collapse, where the sand dips, where the stones tend to tilt. They adjust daily, rerouting slightly, shifting paths like river channels. The roads move like the river. Nothing is fixed. Everything flows. One overseer, named Dedi, walks the paths at dawn. High, carries a reed staff and a basket of chalk. When he finds a spot where the last sledge tipped, he marks the edge with an X and calls for fill soil. His voice is dry from too much dust. He's been walking these roads for 17 years. He's never touched the pyramid. but without him, it wouldn't exist. Nearby, a boy named Heka fills jars with water and carries them to the work teams. T's. Too young to pull, too small to lift. But his job matters. Without water, the roads become death traps. He's been told that if he drops a jar, he loses a day's ration. So he walks carefully, eyes down, feet sure. He will never be remembered. But he once saved a team by soaking a bend that had been forgotten. They said nothing, just nodded. He still remembers it. Occasionally, the stone slipped. When that happens, everything stops. A silence falls across the road. No one shouts. No one moves. If the stone is only tilted, they can pry it back into place. If it falls and cracks, it is marked for discard. But if it injures someone, if a man's leg is crushed, beneath it that day is marked, not on papyrus, but on the faces of those who saw it. There is no shrine for broken backs, no monument for crushed feet, but the roads, no, they absorb everything, and still the stones move forward. At night, the roads go quiet. Crews sleep near the banks, curled under woven mats, their hands blistered and their shoulders locked. In the shape of the ropes they pull, the air cools, the water settles. The stars appear. The pyramid still is invisible from here. Just the idea of it. A voice tired, cracked murmurs near the fire. How many more stones? No one answers, because the answer isn't a number. It's a feeling. One stone at a time, one day at a time, one soaked road at a time. And that is how it begins. What happens when the greatest monument in the world is built not on land, but on mud, sweat, and a road that disappears every night into the river? Asterisk, the river changes every season. That is the first lesson. It floods in the summer, stretching wide and swallowing fields. It recedes in the fall, leaving behind thick layers of black silt, fertile, heavy, wet. The Nile does not ask permission. It moves according to forces older than Pharaoh, deeper than the pyramids, and more enduring than any king's name. And the roads. The roads must follow. As the floodwaters retreat, a narrow window opens. This is when the most crucial stones are transported, when the ground is soft enough to shape, but firm enough to hold. Workers scramble to mark paths, repair broken sledges, and organize relay points along the shore. You stand at one such relay. It looks like nothing. It's just a trampled strip of earth next to a cluster of amphorae and some crates of rope and resin. But this is where the handoff happens. Stones are unloaded from boats, rested on padded sledges, and passed on to the land crews. Like a breath held between two kinds of labor. The boats, now empty, are reloaded with supplies, bread, tools, pig fat for axle grease, and pushed back upriver, and the stones begin their crawl inland. Today's load includes 2 core blocks and a casing stone. The casing stone is white limestone, polished to a dull shine. It's smaller, but more fragile than the others. It chips. It cannot be used on the outer face of the pyramid. The workers speak softly around it, almost reverently. They call it the skin. The crew assigned to it is experienced. 16 men with leather shoulder wraps and hands like braided rope. They soak the road ahead, test each section with a flat foot. Then begin the pull. The sled groans. The ropes stretch. The road holds dot every few meters. A man sprinkles a trail of water from a jar, moving backward as the sled advances. Another smooths the mud with a palm broom. This is coordination. Not commanded, but learned, taught by years of doing. Dedi, the overseer, walks alongside. He watches for the lean dot. Too much tilt to one side, and the stone might slip. Too little water, and the runners will grind to a halt. Too much water, and the road becomes a trap, pulling the sledge downward until it sinks. Balance. That is the secret of the Nile's roads. At the next curve, they encounter a soft patch. Too soft. One man steps in and immediately sinks to the ankle. Daddy raises his hand. The pullers stop. A runner rushes forward with a bundle of reeds. Another with dry earth within minutes. They've rebuilt the section. It won't last a week, but it only needs to last the stone. That's the nature of these roads. They are born with an expiration date. No ceremony, no permanence, just usefulness. Farther along the route, another crew is struggling. Their stone cracked during unloading. It wasn't visible at first, a small hairline fissure along the edge. But now, with the vibration of the journey, it's begun to split. The decision must be made. If they continue, the stone may break completely. If they return it to the river, it's wasted labor. If they abandon it here, they lose both the material and the day. Daddy is called. He crouches by the stone, presses his thumb against the crack, and listens not to the stone itself, but to the silence of the men around him. They want to continue. He shakes his head. Mark it, he says. One worker pulls out a reed brush and marks the block with a red slash dot. It's rejected. They unload it by the side of the road. It will stay there until someone decides what to do with it. Later, it might be broken into gravel, or buried, or used in a lesser wall. As they walk away, one man mutters, "That was my stone." Didi hears it. He says nothing, because no stone belongs to a man. Not really. And yet, they all carry the weight of it. Back at the front of the road, the casing stone has reached the staging yard. From there, it will be taken up the causeway to the pyramid base. It took 6 hours to move it a few hundred meters. The men collapse, their arms shaking, their breath shallow. Water is passed. Not beer, not yet. That comes later. First, they must stretch their limbs so they don't lock into place. A healer walks through the group, rubbing crushed mustard seeds into sore joints. Nearby, a boy is measuring the tracks left by the sledge runners. He uses a simple tool, a forked stick, and a piece of string. He's testing for consistency. The grooves are supposed to be no more than 3 fingers deep. More than that, and the road is wearing too fast. He notes 2 places that will need repair. Before tomorrow, he is 12. No one praises him, but the overseer nods once as he passes. By the time the pyramid reaches its 3rd level, the roads have multiplied. Not just the main causeway from the Nile to the construction yard, but smaller tracks now spiderweb across the site. Each one has a function. Some bring core blocks, bring casing stones, some carry discarded fragments to the stone-breaking pits. A few are used solely for water, rations, in the quiet traffic of administrators and scribes. And every one of them is temporary. There are no road names, no maps, no Incan papyrus records. What matters is memory-living knowledge carried in. The heads of overseers whispered between workers, adjusted daily. Every morning begins the same. A man walks the road. With his bare foot, he presses into the mud to test moisture. If the earth yields too easily, it means the water overnight was too much. If it's dry and cracks under his heel, they'll have to flood it again. The perfect road feels like Clayton's, smooth, slightly cool, too firm, and it resists, too loose, and it swallows. A man named Mephin practices this balance. He was once a fisherman until the Pharaohs' summons came. Now he tends the roads, not the construction, not the stone, just the wet lines of earth that let the impossible move. He has a long scar down his forearm from the time a sledge rope snapped. It left a welt, then tore his skin like papyrus. He didn't leave the site. He just bound it with linen and kept walking the path, because if the road fails, everything fails. He does not speak often, but when he does, men listen. Once, a new overseer tried to reroute a path through softer ground closer to the workers' village to save time. Mephin said nothing. He simply stood at the bend where the road would curve, placed a reed in the ground, and walked away. The next day, the Sled sank. After that, no one questioned him again. He carries a flat stone in his satchel marker. He places it at the side of the road when a repair is needed. 1 stone means fill with reeds. 2 means change direction. If the marker is placed upside down, it means abandon the route entirely. No one taught him this system. It was never written down, but it is followed. As the pyramid rises, the incline steepens. The paths must adjust. Some sledges are now pulled along low ramps made of packed gypsum and gravel. These ramps snake up the side of the structure, winding gradually, hugging the outer edge. Others believe the stone is hauled straight up shorter ramps, stacked and dismantled as needed. There is debate thousands of years later about which method was true. But the workers didn't debate. They adjusted. Daily, quietly, the ramps became extensions of the road, covered in wet sand, constantly repaired, sometimes layered with wood, soaked in oil to reduce friction. The heavier stones are dragged at night when the temperature cools and the mud tightens by torchlight. The road ends. It looks like nothing, a gloppy slope of dirt and boards, but it carries the future on its back. Near the riverbank, a small team of boys refills the clay pots used to wet the road. They fill them at a side channel of the Nile, then carry them 2 at a time up the path. It takes an hour per trip. Their feet are blistered. The pots are heavy. One boy drops his tot, breaks. The water soaks the edge of the road unevenly. When the next sledge arrives, the runners twist. The stone slides off center and tips. It doesn't break, but the corner chips. The overseer yells. The workers scatter. The boy kneels, trembling, picking up shards of clay. Finn arrives. He doesn't speak. He takes the broken shard and drives it into the road edge as a marker. Then he walks away. The overseer stares, but he says nothing more. The stone is recovered. The road is repaired. The boy returns to the river. Later that day, he lines his next pots with bits of cloth, so if one slips again, it won't crack on the stone. He tells no one, but Mepha notices. He nods once. That evening, the workers gather near the rest tents. Their backs ache. Their hands are raw. But the pyramid rose another layer. Someone sings a low chant. It's not a hymn to the gods, just a working song. It's a rhythm that matches the slow drag of the ropes. It has no words now. The lyrics were forgotten long ago, but the sound remains across the fields. The temporary roads stretch in long, brown curves. They shine faintly in the moonlight, like veins across a living thing. Tomorrow, most of them will shift. Some will vanish entirely, and yet the work will go on, because the roads were never the goal, only the means. A scholar, thousands of years from now, will ask how the Egyptians built the pyramids. He'll search for records, diagrams, plans, blueprints, but the truth is simpler. They built roads they knew would not last just long enough to carry the weight. Then they let them wash away, because permanence was for the stone, not the path. And so we ask, is it possible that the greatest structures in history were built upon roads that vanished the moment their work was done, leaving behind nothing but the silence of passage? Asterisk, long before dawn, before the first chisel strikes limestone, for the sledges creak and the overseers shout. There is the smell of garlic and barley on the wind. It drifts through the quarry camps, rich, sour, earthy, a smell that wakes men more effectively than any order ever could. In the silence, before the day's labor begins, the workers gather near a cracked hearthstone where a stew has been simmering for hours. They eat quickly, without ceremony. This is not a feast. This is survival, and what they eat determines how long. They last beneath the weight of Pharaoh's vision. You might imagine the pyramid builders starving, ragged, and faint, like shadows against the stone. But that image is wrong. It doesn't fit the math of labor. The men who carved the pyramid, blocks from the cliffs at Tura, needed muscle. They needed calories. They needed to stay upright under the sun for 10 hours a day, dragging stone heavier than the gods' own judgment. And so, they were fed heavily. Repetitively. Grain was the foundation. Emar wheat and barley, ground daily with flat stones, that wore down faster than the teeth of the men who used them. The bread was coarse, thick, and often filled with bits of grit from the grinding process. It chewed like stone. It swallowed like paste, but it filled the belly. To this, they added onions pungent, raw, sometimes cooked down into the stew pot, garlic when available, lentils, lupins, occasionally chickpeas. A stew might consist of yesterday's bread soaked in water, mixed with oil, and reheated with beans and greens scavenged from nearby plots. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, and that mattered. Salt was precious, not because it was rare, but because it was essential. Without it, muscle fails. So the workers salted their bread, their stew, even their water when the heat took its toll. But the most prized item is meat, and it almost never arrived. Most laborers could go weeks without tasting anything that walked on four legs. A fish here and there, a lizard, maybe. But meat, real meat, from cattle or goat, was rare, reserved for celebrations, or the elite. Still, in the quarry, something strange happened. Every now and then, the meat came, not for ritual, not for reward, but for endurance. It came boiled, salted, and strung on reeds. It came in bits, grisly, fatty, tough, usually liver or heart or skin, never clean cuts, and always came just after someone collapsed. That was the unspoken rule. When the fever spread, when the knees buckled, when a man's arms trembled as he held the chisel, then the stew got thicker. No one asked where it came from. There was a man named Rek. He was in charge of the meat leginat, officially, but practically. He didn't wear robes. He didn't carry a scroll. He just knew. He watched the men while they worked, and he noted when the color drained from their faces. He kept track of how much sweat soaked their backs, how often they paused. He counted, not stone, but fatigue. And when the balance tipped, he sent a boy to the slaughter hut, not a temple, just a mud-walled enclosure with a blood trough and a bucket of charcoal. The meat arrived before sundown, always hot, always plain, and it was always eaten without thanks, not because the men were ungrateful, but because thanks implied choice, and here there was only necessity. You chew slowly. A strip of beef tendon, boiled and salted, melts into your mouth with effort. The fat coats your tongue. You barely taste it, but you feel it. A warmth that spreads to your shoulders, then your legs. Tomorrow, you might go longer before your hands shake. That's the logic of quarry food. Nutritional records don't survive from this time. The bones do. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of laborers buried near the quarries and construction sites. Their bones are dense, worn, with signs of arthritis in the spine and knees, but they show few signs of malnutrition. Their teeth are ground down from grit in the bread, yes, but their ribs are not collapsed. Their joints are not wasted. These were men who were fed enough to endure, and the food told a story. A shallow pit near the quarry once held over 2,000 charred animal bones, goat, sheep, even cattle, burned, discarded, buried, not priestly offerings, worker meals. Near that same pit, shards of pottery show painted symbols, not names, but tallies. Meals served, portions counted, hands fed. You began to realize even the food was counted, measured like the blocks, tracked like the water, managed like rope and copper and pigment. Because Pharaoh's tomb was not built by hunger, it was built by portions. A man named Taffin was once scolded for stealing onions, not because he took too many, but because he took them on a day when another crew hadn't received theirs. He wasn't punished for greed, he was punished for imbalance. The food was never personal, it was structural. Asterisk. The days repeat. Bread, beer, onions, dead, barley, stew, garlic, dead, bread again. The men in the quarry say it half-jokingly. The gods eat incense. We eat what stays in the belly. But there's a truth to the rhythm. Food is the only thing predictable out here. Not the stone, not the weather, not even the work. But the meals, they return like the sun. You're up before dawn again. The camp is stirring. Smoke rises from the hearths before the light touches the cliffs. The cooks begin early, grinding emmer on stone corns, their arms already sore before the first pot boils. The dust from the flour coats their forearms and settles between their teeth. The grinding is endless. They are mostly women. Some are wives. Others are laborers assigned to the kitchen because their hands blistered too quickly or their backs gave out during hauling. They are not spared the weight of the pyramid. They just carry it differently in one corner of the camp. A girl, no, older than 13 shapes loaves with both hands, rolling dough against the edge of a worn reed basket. She sets them to bake in a domed oven made of clay and goat hair. The loaves are flat, crisp around the edges, soft in the middle. She adds bits of crushed coriander when there's enough to spare. But today, there's no coriander, only salt, and salt is a precious thing. It comes in rough crystals from the distant oases. Not always pure, not always clean, enough to preserve meat or make stew more than just boiled grain. One cook, an older woman named Hayat, sprinkles salt onto hot bread as it cools. She does it carefully, slowly, watching it melt into the crust. She murmurs a line under her breath. Let the salt keep you from breaking. No one knows if it's a prayer or a recipe. The men begin to arrive, some still stretching, some silent. One leans against a stone, his shoulder wrapped in linen from a pulled muscle. They take their rations without comment. Bread and a cup of beer, thick, warm, full of yeast. Not intoxicating, just steady. This beer is nothing like what it'll be served in temples. There, the beer will be golden, filtered, mixed with dates or honey. Here, it's cloudy, it's chewed, not sipped. It's almost food, and it's enough. The labor begins. Chisels strike limestone, sledges slide, ropes groaned in the afternoon heat. The workers return for their second meal. This time, it's stewing more liquid than food, with lentils and soaked bread crusts. It's eaten from shallow bowls, passed down the line. No spoons, just fingers and chunks of bread used, like ladles. Sometimes they speak during the meal, but usually not. Talking wastes breath, and the body, already drained from cutting stone, doesn't want to spend more effort than needed. A man named Hecken tells a story while they eat. He says he once worked near the delta, building a nobleman's tomb. The noble provided dried fish every 5th day, but he deducted it from their wages. Here, Hecken says, we get lentils and keep our linen. The men laugh, tired but genuine. Praise Khufu, one jokes, king of onions. Later, the talk turns to the new meat. There are rumors that a large delivery arrived to goats, maybe even a cow. Some say it's because the high overseer is visiting. Others say it's to honor a worker who died last week, crushed when a block tipped. No one says his name, but they remember the scream. The meat, if it comes, will be boiled in large pots over the quarry fire. The cooks will add garlic, maybe leeks if they're lucky. It will taste like broth, like salt, like memory. No one asks for more. They just hope for enough. The food is rationed by task, not status. Those hauling stones receive the most. Carvers and polishers, slightly less. Scribes and messengers, less still. The priests are not here. They eat in the temple. But here, food equals labor. You eat what your body burns. A scribe named Nefiru watches the process. He records food deliveries on broken shards of pottery. He makes lists, counts jars, cutes when the flour arrives and from which district. He doesn't interfere, okay, but he watches closely. He knows that a shortage of bread is more dangerous than a shortage of stone. When the flour is late, fights break out. When the beer sours, men leave the site. When the garlic is gone, sickness spreads faster. Nefru once wrote a report warning of scurvy, but the overseer burned it. Don't frighten the cooks, he said. So Nefru now writes numbers instead of warnings. Behind the kitchen, old bread is drying in the sun. It will be used for beer, crushed into stew, or fed to animals. Nothing is wasted, not because of scarcity, but because every bite has already been counted by nightfall. The pots are empty again. The bowls are rinsed with sand. The spoon's hands are wiped on tunics. The fires are fed with scraps of reed and wood. And the men lie down with their bellies neither full nor hollow, just ... steady. That's all the food needs to do. Tomorrow, the bread will return. The beer will be thicker. Maybe. The stew will be saltier. Maybe. Or maybe it won't. But it will be there, because a pyramid does not rise on stone alone. It rises on barley, on garlic, on the dull heat of onion stew at dusk. And we must ask, what if the greatest labor in history was held together not by rope or chisel, but by bread too coarse to chew, and beer too thick to pour? Asterisk, somewhere deep in the quarry camp, behind the kitchen fires and sleeping mats, lies a pit that no one speaks of yet. Everyone knows it's not a burial pit. It's not officially, but there are bones there. Not human. Goat, sheep, fish bones, mostly. Cracked, charred, snapped in haste. Tomorrow, stained black from ash. Others have been picked so clean they gleam like polished ivory in the morning light. This is where the meals end and where something else begins, because every fragment tossed here tells a story not of kings or tombs, but of decisions made quietly in the heat of hunger. You can stand over this pit and read a year in one glance, when the cattle were fewer, when fish bones outnumbered sheep bones, when the lentils were thinner, when the meat grew fatty or vanished entirely. You see, food is a record even when no scroll is written. And in a place like this, where memory walks in sand and stone and vanishes by morning, these traces matter more than you'd think. There's a woman named Tani who manages the meat pit. She wasn't given the role, simply passed to her when the last pit keeper collapsed from heat. She never asks questions. She just counts each evening. After the last meal is served, she walks barefoot to the edge of the trench and waits. Workers come in small groups to discard their scraps quietly, almost ritualistically. They don't speak much, but Tani watches how many bones each group leaves. She looks at the cuts, the sizes, the burn marks, and she notes what's missing. Today, she notices something strange. Fewer bones than usual, even though it was a meat day. She doesn't mention it aloud. Instead, she walks to the edge of the camp where a small group of stone haulers is sitting in the dark, their stew bowls still full. One of them is coughing hard, wet, doubled over. Tani squats beside him and lays a hand on his back. You didn't eat. He shakes his head. She looks at the others. They're pale, tired in a different way. The stew that came tonight was heavier than usual, fatty, greasy, rich. For men already on the edge of exhaustion, it became too much, and so they didn't eat, and now the pit is quieter. That's how you know when something is wrong, not by the shouting, Not by the collapse, but by the absence of bones. Tani returns to the kitchen and adds extra barley to tomorrow's plan. It will dilute the stew, make it gentler. She doesn't clear it with the overseer. She doesn't need to, because the cook's answer to appetite is not orders. Meanwhile, the scribe Nepharo records an unusual detail, for fewer loaves were taken at dawn, but all workers were present. His scroll asks, were the loaves spoiled? Oh, was the appetite spoiled first? He doesn't send the report. He simply rolls the scroll and places it in a basket of others' notes that will likely never be read. But someday, centuries from now, someone will find the pit Tani watches over. They'll dig slowly, carefully, sifting soil for clues. They'll count the bones, measure the burn marks, and note the odd rhythm of protein and grain. They might write a paper using words like labor distribution and nutritional density. They might not mention Tani at all, but her fingerprints will be there in the absence, in the excess, in the way one layer of ash is thicker than the last. Back in the quarry camp, the routine continues. At the midday meal, the men eat flatbread, dipped in salt water. One laughs when he bites into a chunk of quartz lodged in the flour. Your teeth are cursed, his friend jokes. My grinder is worse. He replies, it's not untrue. The grinding stones shed tiny flecks of sand and stone into the flour, which then wear down the worker's teeth, slowly, relentlessly. Most of the men here already have ground molars and inflamed gums, but they keep eating because hunger is worse than pain. One older worker named Nebi breaks a tooth on a crust. He pulls it out himself, using a reed and a piece of twine. It takes minutes. He says nothing, swishes beer in his mouth, and returns. To work, he doesn't expect sympathy. He expects food, and tomorrow, he will chew with one side of his mouth. There is no romance here, only fuel. Food is not art, not luxury. It's scaffolding, a support beam inside the body. And yet, somehow, meaning still seeps in. When a man dies on the site, his body is wrapped and buried near the edge of camp. Not in glory, not with ceremony, but the workers place a loaf of bread beside his body. Sometimes garlic, occasionally a pot of stew, not because he'll eat it in the afterlife, but because he once ate it here, and that was enough to remember. He does not shout unless he needs to. He doesn't need to often. The crack of the whip is enough. It isn't always used, but its shadow walks ahead of him, across the quarry floor, along the base of the rising pyramid, between the ropes and sledges, in mud paths of the Nile roads. The sound of the whip carries like a second heartbeat, not fast, not frenzied, just steady, like policy. His name is Netjeru. He is not a priest. He is not a noble. He is what the builders call Emira Percarat, the man in charge of supply, labor, compliance, the overseer, Tis, whose tools are a ledger, a wooden staff, and a whip coiled like a snake against his belt. No gold, no linen robes, no incantations, only decisions and their consequences. Net. Jeru was trained not in the temple schools, but on the scaffold lines. He began his life stacking bricks, then lifting beams, then scribing lists of tools, then counting rations, and eventually managing people one stone, one laborer, one punishment at a time. He learned early that stone is simpler than men. Stone does not lie. A block either moves or it doesn't. A path either holds or it collapses. Men, however, carry delay inside their breath. They arrive late. They stretch breaks. They forget orders. They steal flour. They whisper about gods when no one is watching. And so Netjeru watches. He keeps a scroll rolled in his belt. It's not for names of kings or spells for the dead. It's for mistakes. Late arrival, 1 mark. Cracked sledge, 1 mark. It's false measure, 2 marks. It's insubordination, 3.3 marks earns the whip. It does not kill, it does not maim, but it leaves a scar, one that speaks louder than ink. The whip is carved from hippo hide, treated in salt and ash. Its curl is ceremonial. Its function is not. You may recoil. That is expected. But this is not a story of mercy. It is a story of infrastructure. And infrastructure, in its earliest forms, was enforced by muscle under Netjeru's command. The pyramid site operates with terrifying efficiency. At sunrise, the call to labor is sounded by a hollow bronze bell, one of a few pieces of metal on site. Crews line up in ranks, their assignments already logged. Quarry team reports stone count. Quarries report path condition. The cooks report grain weight. The scribes bring fresh pigment.net. Jeru walks the line. He speaks only when necessary. Today. He stops beside a hauler named Kai. The man's hands are blistered, bleeding through linen. He grips the rope with fingers split down the middle. Net. Jeru does not ask if he can work. He says, "Why no gloves?" Kai answers, "Lost in the pit." Netjeru nods. He makes a mark on the scroll, not against Kai but against the toolmaster who failed to replace the gloves. The punishment will be quiet, a docked ration, a public correction, because here, punishment is not about anger, it's about continuity. That afternoon, the block teams fall behind. One of the sledges tips on a wet patch of mud. No one is hurt, but the block is cracked. Useless. Now, 6 hours lost. Netjeru arrives within minutes. He listens. He does not shout. He examines the mud. It's too thin. Overseer of the water team is called .net. Jer. You points to the depth of the sledge rut. Why did you not flood this path, okay? The overseer shrugs. It was dry this morning. Then you should have watched it at noon. The man looks down. .net. Jeru marks the scroll. That night, the overseer is reassigned to latrine duty. No explanation, no reversal, because the pyramid must rise, and mistakes ripple through stone like cracks in glass. But Netjeru is not cruel, not in the way we think of cruelty. He is precise. When a worker collapses from heat stroke, he does not scold. He calls for water, orders shade, notes the failure in the schedule, not the man. Was the load too heavy? He asks the team leader. Within limit, they say. Then the rest break was too short. He writes it down, adjusts the schedule by 10 minutes. Not out of mercy, but out of need. Every man lost is 10 more blocks delayed, and time is the one resource. Egypt cannot quarry. He once visited the Stone Puller Cemetery, the narrow plot behind the scaffolds. He stood among the broken markers and counted the mounds. No names, just links, measurements, distances between one grave and the next. He calculated the average years of service per man. Then he doubled the ration of beer on rest days. It was easier than digging more graves. The workers call him the whip with outrage. Not because he is kind, because he does not strike from impulse. He strikes from data. His scroll is now full. He begins a new one. This one starts with an entry. Brick. Count misaligned by 4 palms. Probable cause. Sun shift during laying. Recommend adjusted plumb measure for afternoon work. The engineer nods when he reads it. The adjustment saves 12 hours of labor over the next week because even punishment has its architecture. And in the early empires of man, the overseer was not just enforcer, but architect of time. So when the Pharaoh's tomb is sealed and the blocks are set forever, and the temple chants rise from polished floors, no one will name Netjeru, but they will walk upon the structure he maintained, measured in silence, sweat, and a soft curl of leather against stone. And we must ask, when did engineering become an art of force hand? How much of our world was built by men who never raised their voice, but never lowered the whip? Asterisk, the worst punishment isn't the whip, It's being reassigned to the stone dust trench. You don't bleed there. You don't scream. Cough slowly, constantly, until your chest forgets what clean breath feels like. It's where the softest blocks are ground down, where the waste from shaping is shoveled away, where the air is a cloud of crushed limestone that hangs like fog, settling into lungs, into sweat, into silence.net. JERU sends men there when they can no longer be trusted, to measure, not to kill them, just to remove them from the equation. One man lasted 13 days. He never spoke again after that. But then, Necheru isn't in the business of death. He's in the business of function, and function demands consequence. Still, his days are not all correction and ledger marks. There's another side quieter, harder to trace. It begins in the margins of his scrolls, where he draws rough diagrams. Not full plans. He's not an architect, but shapes that don't fit inside discipline. Today, the late hours of the morning, he sketches a pulley system, 2 vertical shafts, a crossbeam, ropes looped twice. He saw it once in Nubia. Not here, not sanctioned, but faster. He does not mention it to the priests. They fear shortcuts. They believe anything new threatens the pyramid's spiritual alignment. So, Necheru tests it in silence. He borrows 3 laborers and 2 carts of rope, finds a quiet corner of the yard behind the copper sharpening pit, builds the frame himself, using beams from a cracked scaffolding. By dusk, the frame creaks, lifts a stone half its weight, holds, drops again. He says nothing. But the next day, he assigns 1 man to test the same frame with tools, records the effort, marks it as load shift reduction to haulers saved per sledge. He'll slip the data to the architect later. Quietly, they will say nothing. It's just adjust. That's how change happens here. No proclamations. No announcements. Just marks in margins. That night, Necheru walks the east perimeter of the pyramid. A T. Always walks alone. He doesn't eat with the workers. Doesn't sit with the scribes. His sandals trace the same line, a half circle around the rising blocks. He checks for debris, for loose ropes, for places where the earth has shifted. He doesn't bring the whip, just a scroll and a reed pen. Halfway through the loop, he stops. There's a boy crouched near the ramp, trying to fix a pulley. The cord is too frayed. The knot slips. Necheru crouches beside him. You need a counterknot, he says. The boy flinches, but Necheru doesn't shout. He takes the rope, threads it twice, pulls tight. The frame creaks, holds. You'll need to test again in the morning, he says. The boy nods. Jeru walks on. Back at his tent, he unwraps a clay pot of water, pours a cup, and stares at the blank scroll in front of him. No names, it's just numbers. He begins. 17 laborers transferred to sandpit due to back strain. 5 returned in better condition. 2 did not. Adjustment. Rest cycle increased by 1/4 day per 10. Worked. He pauses. Writes another. New pulley frame tested. Labor reduction confirmed. Recommend expansion. Then he draws a line. A long, slow stroke. It divides the scroll. On one side, correction. On the other, progress. That's how he organizes thought, because even cruelty, when measured, becomes structured at sunrise. A messenger from the temple arrives. He wears robes, carries perfume, walks slowly. He hands Necheru a wax-sealed tablet. An inspection is coming. The High Overseer of Sacred Provisions will walk the site. He will ask questions. He will inspect rituals.net. JERU says nothing. He breaks the seal, reads. Then, goes to work. Asterisk. He increases beer rations for the day stronger, less diluted. Orders the copper tools resharpened. Has the paths swept. Tells the cooks to bake fresh bread. Not from last week's meal remains, not for show. for morale, because an inspection isn't about answers, it's about atmosphere. If the workers look tired, the priests will delay payment. The paths look worn, they'll write reports. The bread is stale, they'll declare the site unhallowed. Hence so, Netgeru engineers behavior the same way he engineers blocks. With pressure. The inspector arrives in the heat of the second hour. His robes are bright. His hands smell of lotus oil. He does not speak to the laborers. He speaks to the gods. Net, Jeru, walks beside him in silence. When the inspector asks why some tools are unmarked, Netgeru replies, the mark wore off. The tool did not fail. When the inspector asks why one of the paths is curved instead of straight, Netgeru says, because the men walk straighter that way. No explanation is longer than needed. After the inspection, the inspector nods once, then leaves. No correction issued. Net, Jeru does not celebrate. He simply notes on his scroll, no penalty. Proceed. That night, a man approaches him, old, bent, a carver, eyes bleached by years of sun against stone. He bows slightly and says, we placed the name of the fallen one in the corner block, not carved, just scratched, small. Netgeru says nothing. He doesn't smile, he doesn't nod, but he does not erase the name, and that, in this place, is a kind of mercy. So we wonder, when discipline becomes the shape of a nation, does the man who enforces it become a builder, something far more terrifying, a planner of silence, a designer of compliance, an engineer of obedience, etched not into stone, but into the men who moved it. Asterisk, the sun is slow this morning, hangs behind the dust, like a watcher reluctant to begin the day. A pyramid site stirs anyway, because time here is not kept by clocks or stars. Time is kept by Netgeru's scroll. It begins before dawn, when the first tally is taken. Ration carts unloaded, rope lengths checked, tool counts matched against the previous night's. Records, when even a single chisel is missing, work halts until it's found. Once it was buried beneath a collapsed worker. Another time it had been pocketed and traded for figs. It was found eventually. Net, Jeru, ensures that all things are found. Today, there's a problem. The western ramp has sunk by 2 fingers. Not enough to halt work, but enough to threaten the sledge. Pads that haul, casing stones, those smooth, white limestone blocks that will someday reflect the sun from the face of the tomb. A sunken ramp risks a slip risks a fracture risks delay. Net, Jeru walks the site barefoot, not out of humility, out of utility. He wants to feel the shift in pressure beneath each step, the soft spots, the places where water has pooled in the night air and made the mud untrustworthy. He calls for the ramp supervisor, a man named Bennett. Bennett's face is swollen, a fresh welt on his cheek. Fight in the quarry camp last night. Beer too strong. Tempers too weak. Net, Jeru says nothing about the bruise. Instead, he hands Bennett a reed and gestures at the ramp. Show me the weak points. Bennett nods, limps forward, pokes into the soil at intervals. 5 paces, 12, 17. Then, sink. Net, Jeru marks it on his scroll. He draws a box around it. This is his symbol for immediate correction. Dry sand, 2 ampere, he says. Add rope reinforcement. Replace boards. Bennett nods. No. Thank you. No reprimand. Only execution. The work will resume within the hour. The stone will pass without issue, and no one except, perhaps, Netgeru remember that the ramp nearly failed. This is how collapse is prevented. Not by worship, not by hope, but by corrections, small enough to feel like nothing. Later that morning, a runner brings a message from the eastern quarry. 2 men missing from roll call. One is sick, the other gone. Desertion. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. The penalty, on paper, is permanent expulsion. The laborer loses their food share, their family loses their household ration, and the man becomes Hafanua, fugitive of the state. But Netjeru doesn't always follow the scroll. He waits until midday, when the sun is at its sharpest, then walks the quarry path alone. He finds the man Meru, age 23, strong, silent, known for hauling double. Sledes.Meru is not hiding. He's sitting near the edge of the quarry wall, staring down at the stones below. His hands white with dust. He doesn't rise when Netjeru arrives. I dreamed the block was my brother, he says. Netjeru says nothing. Meru wipes his hands on his tunic. I couldn't lift it. Still, silence. Then Netjeru lowers himself beside him, not seated, just crouching. There are smaller blocks, he says. Meru, Exhales. It's not forgiveness. It's not absolution. But it is a path. Netjeru doesn't write Meru's name on the fugitive list. Instead, he reassigns him to the rope-cutting pit. Wait. More monotony. He notes it in his scroll. Laborer Meru, reassigned for fatigue. Supervised correction. That's the phrase. Supervised correction. It appears often. Some entries refer to men, some to paths, some to boats or pulley frames or ledgers. But the principle is always the same. Don't punish the fault. Correct the system, because Netjeru doesn't care about guilt. He cares about function, and it's working. The pyramid is growing faster now. Blocks are placed daily. The ramps extend, adjust, retract. The scribes report fewer errors. The food lines are longer, but more efficient. The cooks use dried leeks to stretch the stews. The men hum work chants that keep pace with their pull. Netjeru's whip hasn't cracked in 6 days, but he still wears it, and that's enough. One evening, just before sundown, he visits the stone carver's trench, not out of need, out of habit. He watches as an old man traces symbols into a casing block. A reed, a bird, a sun disk, the name of the king. The carver pauses and looks up. Do you want yours there too? He asks, half a smile under his breath. Netjeru blinks once, then turns away. He says, I already have a name. He doesn't explain what he means, but it's written again and again in the scrolls. Not in ink, not in prayer, but in rhythm. Every correction, every prevention, every deviation avoided, every ramp that didn't break, every block that didn't fall. The pyramid remembers him, even if the temple never will. His legacy is not carved, it's calibrated, and when the final stone is placed, and the last scroll is sealed, and the priests chant their blessings over the burial shaft, there will be no mention of the man who kept the path dry. The rope tight, the fear sharp, but that's fine. Netjeru's work was not to be seen, only to be done. So we wonder now, can a man shape a monument not with stone, but with silence, structure, and the steady refusal to let anything fall apart? Before Khufu built his perfect pyramid at Giza, before the Great Pyramid even had a name, there was another greater. In ambition, if not in execution, it was the first real attempt. The first large stone pyramid, a page, the one that taught Egypt what not to do. It stood at Meidum, and it collapsed, not in secret, not in war, not by sabotage, but by gravity, time, in the slow failure of assumptions. This is not a story about triumph. It's a story about starting over. Snefru was the king, the first of the 4th dynasty, ruler of vision, of experimentation, of the kind of confidence that assumes the gods will approve because no one has ever told him otherwise. He didn't want a step pyramid. That style belonged to Djoser in the old school of royal design. He wanted smooth sides, a shape that the sun could slide down like a golden blade. He wanted the heavens wrapped in stone, and so he ordered his architects to smooth the steps of the Medum pyramid, to cover the tiers in casing blocks and make it gleam. The design was bold, revolutionary, and flawed. The core was built in stages layers, stacked inwards like a staircase. But the casing was added later, resting against this interior like skin against bone. There was no deep anchor. The outer stone relied on friction, gravity, and blind trust. For a while, it held, but no one could see what the sand saw. Wind swept against the lower corners, gradually loosening the base. Rain rare, but real slipped into gaps. Foundations shifted. The weight of the upper layers bore down, and the angle, so carefully measured in theory, proved too steep in life. One Dano record tells us exactly when it cracked. The outer layers peeled downward, collapsing in great sheets. The slope shattered. The casing fell. The steps beneath, exposed, tilted. Some say there was a rumble. Others say it happened slowly, a shrug rather than an explosion. By the time it was over, half the pyramid was a ruin. It looked like a broken tooth, and Pharaoh Snefru was still alive to see it. That's the part often forgotten. He didn't die before it failed. He didn't order its destruction. He saw the ruin. He heard the excuses. He read the reports, and then he began again. Not in Medum, but to the south, 2D Ahsheur, to build what would later be called the Bent Pyramid. But let's stay in Medum for a moment longer, because even in failure, this pyramid mattered. Inside, the corridors remain. The burial chamber still lies in wait. The ramp, once used to carry stone, is still visible, buried, crooked. But there, the workers who hauled those blocks, who carved the corridors, who hauled the casing and patched the cracks, they vanished. Not in history, but in silence, because who records the names of those who failed?